This video lesson will take a brief and simple look at the rise of big business during the Gilded Age in American history. So this is during America's second industrial revolution, and we need to understand what's happening in businesses to allow them to become so powerful and so intrusive in American society. So in the early 1800s, corporations are going to emerge as the dominant form of business. Corporations have been around for a long time, but there were some rules and regulations in place that made forming corporations and having them grow to the size they're going to a little bit more difficult. But with more laissez-faire attitudes towards business, corporations are going to grow tremendously in the 1800s. A corporation is a business that sells stock in order to raise capital. Stock is actual ownership in the corporation, and capital, of course, is money. So how exactly does this work? Well, it's pretty complex. So very simply stated, Standard Oil would issue stock and sell it and make it available to the public. People would purchase stock in Standard Oil and actually become what are called stockholders, that they would actually be part owners of the company, a very small percentage depending on how much you purchased. Well, what is Standard Oil going to do with the money that they raise by selling that stock? Well, they're going to take that money and they're going to invest it back into their business. They're going to purchase materials, purchase land, hire employees, do advertising, whatever it is that they need to do in hopes of generating more revenue. So that investment in more oil drills and oil derricks should result in greater profits, which are then paid and shared back to the stockholders in the form of dividends. Now, that's a pretty simple look at how this all works, but selling stock allowed corporations to raise massive amounts of money and gain a tremendous advantage in the marketplace. That brings us to the economies of scale. So as corporations grew, the overall cost of manufacturing ultimately decreases when you produce more goods at a faster rate. Corporations were able to invest in the newest technology, hire more employees, build more effective machines, which increase their manufacturing capabilities, increase their production, and decrease their costs. So Standard Oil can invest more money into its business, producing more and more and more oil, which ultimately allows it to produce that oil cheaper and sell it for 20 cents a gallon. Smaller companies like Ramage Oil, which only produces a small amount of oil, can't afford to sell it at 20 cents a barrel and has to sell it at 80 cents a barrel. Standard Oil is simply bigger, more efficient, more productive, and therefore their costs are lower. Eventually, Ramage Oil is going to go out of business because they can't compete with Standard Oil, and eventually Ramage Oil is going to disappear and Standard Oil will simply purchase their resources and add them to their own. This was very common for Standard Oil to do. They drove out their competition. Because they were so large and so effective, they could afford for the short term to lower the price of their oil to, let's say, 5 cents a barrel, which would then put all of the competitors in that marketplace out of business, and Standard Oil could buy them up. This is known as horizontal integration, where a company expands within the marketplace by putting competition out of business. After Standard Oil takes out their competition, they can raise their prices back up to 20 cents a gallon, and now they have an even larger share of the marketplace. Another way that these corporations gained power and influence was by controlling the means of production. So, for example, Andrew Carnegie made steel. Steel is made up of coal and lime and iron, other things as well, but we'll focus on just these three things. Carnegie was purchasing the coal and the lime and the iron from other manufacturers and other producers. Well, why not just own them yourself and not have to pay anybody else? And that's exactly what Carnegie is going to do. That's known as vertical integration. So he's going to purchase and own all the materials that he needs to make his steel. So he's going to purchase the iron fields, he's going to purchase the lime quarries, he's going to purchase the coal mines, and then after that initial investment pays off, he owns everything. So he's not sending any of his money to any outside companies or corporations. This, in the long term, is going to lower his costs and speed up his production because he controls the flow of materials needed to produce his steel. So, The economies of scale are going to be huge advantages to corporations like Standard Oil and like Carnegie Steel. The use of horizontal integration is going to take out competition, while the use of vertical integration is going to streamline your manufacturing and production and continue to lower your costs and allow you to dominate the marketplace. This leads us to monopoly. One of the biggest terms from this period of time. Monopoly is when one business controls the majority of an industry. That business, in this case, being Standard Oil, and the industry being the oil industry. So in a monopoly, one business controls the majority of the product or the resource in that industry. And by 1880, Rockefeller controlled 90% of America's oil. So why are monopolies bad? Why are we going to see some content later on in our course about getting rid of monopolies? Well, a monopoly could raise prices drastically. If you controlled all the resources in that industry, then you're free to raise or lower the prices however you see fit because you have eliminated all of your competition. Without effective competition, prices can and will usually go up. And there's no incentive to innovate. Competition between businesses makes sure that each business stays fresh, that they are looking for ways to remain innovative and competitive with other businesses. When you have a monopoly in the marketplace, these things tend to not happen. Although Standard Oil was not really guilty of raising their prices drastically, as they had to compete against an international market. Some other ways that businesses were able to manipulate the system and gain tremendous power were to form trusts. Again, we're looking at very simple definitions and very simple examples of these things because this is a history class, not an economics class. But a trust is a group of businesses that are run together by a board of trustees whose goal basically is to eliminate competition and to control the marketplace. They're interested in fixing prices and collaborating together to squash their common competition. Standard Oil is going to form a trust in 1892. Basically, you hand over your stock to a board of trustees, and that small board of trustees runs all the businesses together. Rockefeller also created a holding company. This was something that was also done by other business leaders at the time. A holding company is a business that literally doesn't produce anything. It simply holds or owns stock in other companies. New Jersey passed a law that said that a corporation could own stock in another one, and that's where holding companies came from. It's a business that just holds stock in other companies and again runs them together as one large enterprise, dominating the market, eliminating competition, and putting more power and more wealth in the hands of a few people. Monopolies became targets for political cartoons and reformers, as we're going to see getting into the progressive era. This political cartoon shows Standard Oil as an octopus, a very common symbol used to show the power and danger of monopolies. Tentacles wrapped around the US Capitol, wrapped around the Supreme Court, and eyes fixed on the White House, which hasn't quite been put into the grasp of Standard Oil, but you can get the implication here from this cartoon that Standard Oil is eyeing up the White House. And in this one too, this is the Senate chambers in the US Congress. We can see in the back of the chamber, standing looking over top of all of the senators, are all of these trusts, including the Standard Oil Trust, the Sugar Trust, the Coal Trust, the Steel Beam Trust. And they are literally bags of money, which would show their financial influence over these senators, their power, their wealth dominating the government. The sign here in the top says, "This is a Senate of the monopolists, by the monopolists, and for the monopolists," clearly indicating that the monopoly has control over the Senate. The people's entrance is closed and barred, indicating that the people no longer have a voice in this chamber of government and that the Senate operates under the eyes and control of the trusts. So, what are some big takeaways we need to know moving forward in our study of American history during this time period? Well, again, this is a very basic introduction to these concepts, but we need to be aware of them moving forward. Corporations developed and grew extremely wealthy and extremely powerful. We'll continue to look at some examples of corporate power moving forward. How did they do this? By using the economies of scale and vertical and horizontal integration, which allowed them to reduce their costs, to increase their profits, and to eliminate competition in the marketplace. This gave them monopolies and trusts, which allowed them to gain control over entire industries, eliminate their competition, while engaging in unfair business practices. So that's a quick look at the rise of big business during the Gilded Age. Hopefully you got something out of this lesson and are able to apply it to your American history studies.